right, so we're starting to get our stuff together and theme this a little differently. So for the next couple weeks, if you guys are, I'm gonna take my mask off, so I don't gotta wear that anymore. Since if you guys are on our email list, then what's happening is for 3-week blocks, we're taking a different body part and giving you guys some information about what's going on our, just kind of what is going on at Robbins Rehabilitation. There's lots of different topics that we can cover. In the last couple weeks, we have been covering neuropathy, and we got some good feedback on that. Now we're covering low back pain. So what we kind of thought of, we have 3 different kind of webinars, classes. I'm in love with the word webinar. It indicates like work or you have to do something. I don't know. I'm not in love with that. Nick, by the way, I think we're on Facebook.
I just looked I'm on my computer looking at it. It's definitely
nice. Okay. I'll have to monitor comments or something. So what we're going through is kind of theming out in the things that we've been working on. We get lots of commonly, like frequently asked questions. That's definitely going to be the third portion of what we do. It's going to be questions that we get from you guys. So you're going to be getting emails from us, and on our Facebook page, there are going to be opportunities for you guys to ask questions. So for the next 3 weeks, I want you to think about all the questions that you have about low back pain, because that's what Nick and I are going to cover in detail. So the first webinar class that we're doing right now is myth busting. So I don't know if we can use that. They're going to come back at us for like some kind of copyright. I don't think they own the words myth and busting, but maybe together they do. So we're going to call it Busting Myths, PT style.
Busters.
Yeah, don't say that. Actually, they're just going to kick us off Facebook. Okay, don't say that. All right, so today what we're going to talk about, and our goal is to kind of be able to do this in about 15 minutes and give you guys some actionable stuff that you can do so that you can not just kind of be a passive observer. We want you guys to get benefit out of this. And usually that requires action. There's lots of great information out there. Lots of bad information out there too, like we'll talk about. But what we want to do is to cause action. So today, what we're going to do is fixing what Google and your neighbor told you. So what common, Nick knows what we're talking about. But Nick, what am I talking about here? When people are lifting, what do they always say, or what are they always told?
Yeah, so this week what we're going to do is you always got to lift with your legs. No matter what, got to lift with your legs. And there's like a perfect sign that you'll see, think, lift with your legs, not your back. I mean, this is one of those that I don't disagree that you should absolutely be using your legs as part of a lifting pattern. But it should not be the only way really that you are lifting. And really when done properly, you should also be using your back as well.
Okay, so people are already starting to freak out. Like, okay, I've been told for a million years I gotta lift with my legs. There's signs all over work that show me, with proper lifting mechanics. Let's go over when you should lift with your legs and when you should not lift with your legs, so we can give people a little bit of background on what the message that we're really trying to tell.
So you should lift with your legs when you're squatting. That's the way that I look at it because I look at things from movement patterns, right? Like that's what we are as PTs, like the movement experts. So we're going to be looking at it in that manner. So when I need to complete a squat type movement, so that's how I'm going to be using. I'll start separating the two in a second. And when shouldn't you use your legs? Well, it's not that you're not using your legs. I think that's almost like a misnomer, if you will, about this. It's like, no, when you're lifting something, your legs are always going to be involved, but almost more like the primary driver. So when you're squatting, you're going to be maintaining much more of like an upright posture as you go up and down. Like that's the classic, just stay ramrod straight, just drop down, bend from the knees, and just pick everything up. Versus like a hinge pattern or a bend pattern where it doesn't mean that you're neglecting your legs. No, but now you're just actually hinging. And when we say this, your spine is still straight. It's still in a very stable position. It's just you're shifting the stress more from your quads, the front of your legs, which is doing a lot more of that squat type movement, along with a lot of other muscles, yes, but more towards the back. But when I say the back, I'm talking about the posterior chain, the low back, the glutes, the hamstrings, all the prime movers along the back side of the body. So it's really just shifting, almost using some more of the front side of the body, the muscles, versus the back side of the back side of the body for the muscles.
Okay. And I think we're going to kind of talk about this in the next slide in terms of when you shouldn't lift with your legs, but when you shouldn't lift with your legs, but just kind of talk about this concept of breaking down at the weakest point. So for people who've never heard that before, what does that mean and how do we get to apply it?
So that weakest point, this is the important one, right? I bent over to pick up my pen. I dropped it and my back went out on me, right? Like I came out like I was in crazy pain. It's like, well, no, you just were like a lot of times it's unfortunately you were so used to just squatting. Like everything was just straight up and down, straight up and down, straight up and down. And now your back has become actually very weak from not using. You haven't loaded your low back. You haven't loaded your glutes as much. All of these big honking movers, big protectors of the spine. And now the weakest point like starts to break down. And that's what happens. Like you do something that's very light, relatively like, hey, maybe you pick up 100 pounds all day at work, but you're just in that constant squatting pattern. And now, like I said, you bend over to pick up a pen, just bend over to tie your shoes, and all of a sudden, oh, like you freeze. You're like, oh, my back went out on me. So it's that type of thing that I look at as that weakest point. Like, okay, just if you haven't done it, if you haven't used it, it has by default basically become your weakest link.
Okay. So explain why I always tell patients when they come in, I said, you know what? I don't see a ton of people here that, I was lifting up my couch over the weekend and I hurt my back, or I was at work and I was trying to pick up something really heavy and I hurt my back. I said, when I hear about it, it's when someone says, yeah, at the end of the day, I just kind of bent over to untie my shoe and then my back started bothering me, which is hard for them because they don't understand that concept. I think it kind of runs in line with what you're saying here. So explain why we don't see more people that come in because they were picking up a huge rock in their yard that weekend. But we do see a ton of people that either say, I don't know what I don't remember anything specific, or this can't be right. But I think when I went down to untie my shoe, I blew my back out. But I know that can't be right. What's happening there?
Yeah, that's more the you don't use it, you don't use it, you lose it, right? You don't do something often enough, like you just haven't done it, whether it's light, heavy, anywhere in between. Like that's what happens. Like you're gonna break down, and that's like that cumulative fatigue too. Sometimes, like you said, like more end of day, it's like it might not take much because now you fatigued out like throughout the day, and you've made that weakest link even weaker, and now you go bend over to, like you said, untie the shoe, and boom, there it's gonna grab you.
Yeah, and I think too, what I see a lot of is when someone goes to lift up something heavy, I think they kind of get better engagement. They think about, okay, I'm going to lift this up. I've got to, at least maybe work on my mechanics a little bit, or not even if they don't know the proper mechanics, just like I'm going to activate as much muscles as possible so I can do this without injury. But when people go down to pick up a pencil, they typically don't use good form and they don't have the proper activation. That's when they kind of run into trouble.
And you're saying activation, I even think of like awareness, right? You're very aware of what your posture, what your lifting mechanics are for something heavy. When it's something light, people just don't care as much. I mean, and that's when you're more susceptible too.
Okay, and so let's try to bring this more to an athletic arena. So in terms of when you break down at the weakest point, maybe some people can relate to it more if you're talking about like a specific athletic movement. So when people have injuries like ACL injuries, I think of that a lot. So talk about that concept and maybe people can get a better understanding of it. Well, the weakest point when someone has an ACL injury, how can that concept be similar to what we talked about where you're just, if you don't lift with your back, if you don't train those muscles, when you have to use them at some point, it's not going to go well if you have never used them before.
Yeah, and that's where with maybe like strength training when it's applied to sports, it's like you have to use perfect form every time, and that sometimes is actually does get you in trouble, right? So this is where like learning to lift when you're fatigued, learning to control things when you're fatigued is really what becomes important because it's not just the muscular control. You're not going to always have the muscles to rely on. So you have to be training other systems then too. That's maybe a little bit deeper conversation. Sorry, I'm going to pull back on that one. But the not being afraid to use slightly off form as you become fatigued. Now, this isn't something that you should start with in somebody who's untrained. Like, no, you have to build up to that point. You have to know exactly how to move perfectly first. Once you have that form down, once you actually know, in this case, like where a neutral spine would be and how to move that through space, okay, now you can flex a little bit through that. Now you can extend a little bit through that. Now you can rotate a little bit with that. And the same thing applies to the knee, right? If we're talking the ACL. So if you're doing like split squats or lunges and you only do it where your knee is perfectly over top of your ankle, it's not traveling forward, you're on a completely stable surface, there's nothing else, and you're just like straight up, straight down. Well, now there's a lot of room for error there. You do always have some degree of carryover. You strengthen more than the range that you strengthen in. So if you just go up and down, if I only go up and down 3 inches, just as I'm squatting here, right? We'll actually get a little bit of carryover deeper than 3 inches. That's what I mean by that carryover in a range. So if you're always just training exactly perfect, just in one line, no problems, sure, you're going to be super strong in that position. But anytime you're thrown off ACL, hey, it's always planting, single leg, cutting, turning. It's usually on an unstable surface. I mean, there's grass, there's turf, whatever it is. It's not just like a purely flat surface. So now you've basically met all of the criteria to be more susceptible, especially if you haven't spent enough time in that.
Yeah, and I think the concept of doing that when you're lifting, either at work or home, I think that's what we want to try to talk about next. So when you always lift with your legs, when you're not putting yourself in a vulnerable position, at least occasionally, we're not saying do this all the time, but at least occasionally, if you ever get into that position and you've never trained in that position before, it might not go very well for you. So that's what we're talking about. So let's talk about that in terms of lifting mechanics, because that's most applicable to people who are listening right now. What does that look like? Like, how do I start to work on maybe lifting with my back a little bit so that I can prepare myself to be in that, either if I'm fatigued or not using perfect form?
The first thing is just like being able to find what we consider like a neutral spine and then take that neutral spine into a bending pattern. So it's really simple. I mean, just starting off, like I said, standing like and just being able to go back and forth really without any resistance. But then it's okay. Now you're going to start increasing that load. Like you need really like the bending pattern and the squatting pattern. There's a lot of different strength ratios that you can look at. Let's just say they should be equal, right? You should be able to squat about as much as you should be able to bend over and pick up. Again, believe me, there's a lot more to it than that. It's a lot more nuanced, but really you should be able to work up so that those things are looking just about as strong.
Yep. And the simple concept of starting out with no resistance, just your body weight, and then slowly, kind of adding resistance to that to make sure that the muscles are strong when you're doing that. So if people want to kind of take a deeper dive on this, then what I would suggest that you do is you look over our newest production here at Robbins Rehab West is our Ultimate Guide series. So this should be ready in about a week or two. I think Laura's watching, so it depends a lot on Laura and printing. But we have a bunch of these Ultimate Guides. So these are about 50-page guides. They're kind of like magazines that you flip through, and it has actual programming in there. So I was talking to Nick today about, okay, well, what kind of programming can we give them to kind of work on getting stronger with lifting with your back? Well, the programming that's in this guide is the perfect thing for that. So these aren't ready yet, but what you can do is if you go to robbinsptwest.com/guide and you click on the get the Ultimate Guide for Low Back Pain, what's going to happen is it's going to take you to a form. It's going to take a couple pieces of information. You guys are watching us on Facebook, so you guys are the first people that are going to get this. You might see this in emails too if you're on both. If you follow us on Facebook and get email, you might get some emails about this. But the first ones that we're going to give out are the people that register first. So all you got to do is fill out that information. We have Ultimate Guides there's a lot of different ones, but for the next 2 weeks, we're focusing on low back pain. So if you want to do that, all you got to do is go there, register. You can put your information in, and then we will send you one once we get them printed. It should be, again, in a couple weeks, we'll have these ready to go. But it's going to be great programming for people that are looking to prevent low back pain. And certainly if you have low back pain right now, then you have a couple options. You can kind of read our content. So we have new blogs and podcasts that are up on our website. If you haven't checked that out recently, we're going to be doing these webinars that we do on Wednesdays. And also we're going to have this resource that should be coming in a couple weeks. But if you are having a tunnel of back pain, you just want to get rid of it, then obviously you should just come in for a free screen. So this is for you, or if you're listening to this, or friends or family members. Free screen is a 30-minute one-on-one appointment with one of our PTs. It doesn't cost you anything. Come in, get everything checked out. We've got to convince you that we know what we're talking about and that we can help you. You get a diagnosis, so we tell you what's going on. You get a prognosis, how long it's going to take to fix this, and we get a plan. We kind of go over what we would do in physical therapy if you're appropriate for that. So if you guys have interest in that, all you got to do is call 610-841-3555. Or go to our website, and you can actually, there's a chat feature. You can start talking to us if you want to get some more questions answered. But yeah, I'm excited to have these come out, because this is going to be a lot of the content that we talk about, that Nick and I talk about, are going to be covered in these ultimate guides. It's a great resource for you to have to deal with any other problems that are going on. Nick, any closing remarks here on our first busting myths for the world of physical therapy?
I would actually say, like, now as we're finishing up, like putting some of the finishing touches on the Movement Mastery program, that would be another one if people are interested in. That's going to be a little bit more robust, like a full body program though too. But I think it's like one of those, hey, if you want to incorporate the squat, incorporate your bend, I mean, and so on and so forth, like that's going to be a great way to get that in then too.
Yeah, so if you do kind of same thing, but a little bit different, go over to robinsptos.com/movement mastery. And here you'll have all the information about that. So here's a testimonial, a guy you might know. Information about the program, but basically it's a 90-day total body program. It's like a gym in a box. So you can do this stuff at home. You can watch this video. Nick and I explain it here. But it's basically programming for 3 months and all the equipment that you need for the programming, including an exercise ball, physio ball that you've seen in our offices, our sport cords that you've seen in our offices, lacrosse balls, double lacrosse ball, single lacrosse ball for soft tissue releases that we give you in this program. So if you aren't having any injuries, or maybe you have like a little bit of discomfort, you need to do something about it, but for whatever reason, you're not coming in for physical therapy, fine, you're avoiding us. This is something that you can do as long as the pain isn't severe.
Yeah, the pain-free is huge on that, Travis. I want to emphasize that for people. It's like, if you're already in pain, yeah, this program isn't necessarily going to be bad, but it's also not necessarily going to help you get out of that pain either.
Yeah, so it's not designed for that. It's designed more for people that aren't having any pain. So if you're having pain, you got to get that cleaned up first. So you can come in for physical therapy. We can do that. But this is kind of the program that Nick and his team came up with, because we had a ton of people that were just kind of in the middle somewhere, especially right now. Like, some people either can't go to the gym or aren't super excited about going back to the gym. So some people are really excited about going back, and they're starting to open back up, which is great. And we have great partnerships in the area that we would refer you to. But for someone who is looking for something, that is a little bit less of, I want to say less of a commitment, but in terms of convenience, like, that's the biggest part. It's just, you can set all this stuff up at home. You don't have to drive back and forth to the gym that you're going to. And it has emails that you get every week. So you'll get programming emails, you'll get general health and wellness emails from Nick and our team to help you out with that. So it's a really great 90-day program that we would suggest, and it's brand new. So you guys are kind of testing it out. So that's why the price is so low. So those two things. If you guys have any questions about anything, you can post them below. If you're not seeing this live and you want to ask some questions, Nick and I will go back in here and make sure we're getting all those questions answered. So just kind of post them below on Facebook, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks, Nick.
See you guys then.